was a member of his sect for what, about 2 years perhaps, and thereafter, although he stopped practicing active magic, still was fascinated by Crowley, and made a great collection of his works, and made it perhaps his life work, perhaps, to be the great authority on this extraordinary man.
And this is how you've ended up with these wonderful things like his magic wand.
A tenth of, yes, it's magnificent. And
do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
It is indeed his original wand, and he must have used it in many magical ceremonies.
And when did your father meet him?
I suppose father came across him in the mid-20s after he left Cambridge, and was very influenced by his thought and work.
And strangely, they were both at Trinity.
Yes, well, I had forgotten that Alistair Crowley was at Trinity, yes.
I wonder if that had anything to do with him.
I don't know. Certainly, father was fascinated by him and joined his sect for a while.
Which was the Otto.
Yes, the Ordo Templar Orientalis, I think it's called.
Which is still in existence today, and you don't have any contacts with the Otto still?
Not at all. But I think, well, of course, I'm just the son of a follower of Alistair Crowley. I'm not a follower myself, and so it's I'm not really in a position to let you into any hidden esoteric secrets, as it were, because it's only what I've heard from my own father that I can recount. He was delighted to be interviewed and so on and so forth, and was always prepared to talk about him to people who came.
I hear you had some established visitors that came down.
Oh yes, we had Mick Jagger and the Rolling Stones visited once in their flower-powered Bentley, which caused a bit of a flutter in the village, brought by this extraordinary man, Kenneth Anger, who was another great knowledgeable figure about Crowley. And there was one occasion he wanted to come and visit father, but was too scared to knock on the door, but he came and spent the night in the garden, naked.
That's right, yeah.
There was some story about trying to cut a willow at 5 in the morning, just as the
cut
first...
a yew wand?
To spank him.
Trouble the hedgehog on his third step or something like that.
That's right, yes.
Which is now stuffed on his altar.
But you said, you know, he had a sense of fun.
Oh yes, he was constantly looking at the amusing and funny side of things. And this had an unfortunate effect on some of his followers, who didn't really consider him to be quite as serious as they hoped a true pseudo-messiah should become, or as a man who wanted to found a religion, and who, in the event, perhaps failed to found a religion because he joked about himself so much.
Well, maybe he did found a religion, except that it was Ron Hubbard who took it that step further.
Well, that's right. My father knew Ron Hubbard quite well, and has got some quite interesting paperwork about him upstairs. You know, the start of Scientology can be rooted in some of this stuff. But of course he was a science fiction writer as well, wasn't he? And so it's interesting when science fiction and pseudo-religion come together.
Anger didn't come with a red-headed woman called Cameron.
Cameron, yeah, oh, Cameron, yes. No, I knew of Cameron. She was a remarkable American adept, wasn't she?
Yeah. She was involved in the ceremony that Hubbard and Parsons were performing.
Yes.
Because Hubbard stole Parsons' wife, girlfriend, Betty.
Right.
And then they said they would conjure up another one. And then there's a letter from Parsons to Crowley saying, "I've got it. She's turned up. We did this spell and she turned up, this red-headed, my scarlet woman." And it was Cameron. And I don't know where... Hubbard obviously got her from somewhere and made her appear in the ceremony, and there she was, and then she appears in Kenneth Anger's film. And you've got Alistair Crowley at his death, which we have in the film. We have him played by John Shrapnel. We've got him at his death.
The phallus.
Who's a little bulky here. He's actually, you know, decimated almost, isn't he?
Yes, yes. Well, I think he was a heroin addict. That's the painting of by Alistair Crowley of 4 monks carrying a goat to nowhere, which John Symonds used on the cover of the first biography of Alistair Crowley after his death.
And she went to a ceremony where they tried to get a goat to fuck his wife, and in my film they're saying my film is a bit gross, and I have nothing as extraordinary as what he actually got up to.
Well, you know? I know. Some of the wall paintings in the Abbey of Cefalù are still very dramatic, and there's there's an
They're
attempt.
still there.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, and there's an attempt to restore them and make them of national importance. But of course, the Italian government finds it all terribly embarrassing. Did you hear about this?
No.
About Mike's story about Aleister Crowley's wand?
He was looking at some books here, and I suddenly realised that he was a tantric magician of sorts, and that there was a very tantric object in the room. And so I said to him, Vashisht, can you sense anything in this room that's really dark and evil? And he was standing here, and he meditated, and then he put his left hand out, not his right hand out, and he walked straight backwards, like this, looking forwards, looking at me. He didn't look backwards, I'm having to look backwards, and his hand went straight between these two boxes, and he picked up Aleister Crowley's wand, without looking at it at all. I went into a sort of blind funk at that point and said, Vashish, put it down. It's actually a very important object. I don't think you should play with this. And he said, no, Mike, it's asking me for blood. Can you get me something to prick my finger with? And a flash of inspiration came, and I said, well, shall I get a thorn of a rose? He said, perfect. So I went out to the garden, with some climbing roses just over there. I broke off 3 or 4 thorns of a rose and brought them back, and he said, absolutely marvellous. And he pricked his finger. No, he pricked his finger, this finger here, and he fed it. He has no idea what it was, anything about it at all.
The piece of vellum which Father had in his scrapbook, which was had an invocation on it, and in order to charge it with magical purpose, it had been put up the vagina of a prostitute for 2 or 3 months in order to charge it with the spiritual oils of union, and thus it became an extremely powerful object.
I don't know what would have happened if I'd have put things like that in the film. I mean, I've put quite mild things in comparison. I mean, but people are going, this film is gross, and how can you put this in a film? And I'm saying, but it's nothing as extraordinary and gross as what he actually did. You know?
A piece of vellum she donated to this institution, and then subsequently it's been stolen from the book and is somewhere out there now.
You think he's doing bad or good?
Well,
it's
charged. It's charged. And as a result, it is obviously a very powerful thing.
Do you think the world is becoming a worse place because it's out?
Because it's loose. Well, we don't know.
Well, there is a theme slightly like that in the film, that there's something out there, and maybe you know, maybe it's the villain.
He certainly was obviously a magnetic personality, and people did drop everything and follow him. There's no doubt about it. When you have that power to influence people to that extent, it is rather remarkable.